So this is a little video exploring a blitz, revision blitz on Kent's character. Let's go. Have the stopwatch going. Try to get this one nice and short. Kent is one of a minor character in the play, but don't forget, I keep on going back to that question they asked, I think it was 2017 on Hamlet, where they asked the question about the dramatic purpose of two of the minor characters. So look over them. Here we go. Ready? Kent. At the beginning of the play, what is he? He's noble and brave and admirable. He's the one who stands up and tells Lear what he's doing is wrong in the abdication scene. Be Kent unmannerly when Lear is mad. First time madness is mentioned in the play. It's mentioned by Kent. What wouldst thou do, old man? Thinkest thou that duty shall have dread to speak when power to flattery bows? Fantastic quote. He's a plain speaker. He tells the truth. He tells Lear, you are being a fool. If you hand over power, these women, these daughters, these people are not going to continue to, shower you in kind words. Don't you understand what you're doing? And of course, Lear doesn't know what he's doing because Lear is blinded by his hubris, and he's, psychologically weak and old and feeble. Okay, but there's Kent, unbelievably brave. He tells Lear, I'll tell thee thou dost evil. Fantastic monosyllabic language. Talk about the language and imagery in the play. And remember that question about how Shakespeare's language and imagery helps develop characters. That was from, I think, 2019 or 2020. Gorgeous, gorgeous question. And here, I'll tell thee thou dost evil. Monosyllabic language showing how brave and insightful and honest Kent is. Later on in the same scene, he says, reverse thy doom and in thy best consideration check this hideous rashness. And then he says, answer my life, my judgment. And that's the most important part there, you see. He's so noble. He has a powerful sense of duty. He's willing to die in order to serve Lear by telling Lear he's wrong. So he is not, weak in the sense of afraid to tell his powerful king the truth. He is not self-interested in the sense that he knows that offending Lear is going to cause himself harm. He is willing to put himself in danger to serve his king. He has a clear-minded sense of duty. And of course, for that, he's banished, told, come not between the dragon and his wrath. And, the bow is bent, make from the shaft. And he's told he has 10 days to get out of the country. But does he run away on Lear? No, he doesn't. By the middle of Act 1, Scene 3, we meet him again, and he's become this Caius character. He's changed his appearance. He's changed his clothes. He's no longer the lord dressed in finery. He's dressed like a peasant. He changes his accent. And he says, now banish Kent, if thou canst serve, or thou dost stand condemned. Again, you're talking about language and imagery. What a great example of juxtaposition. That those words, serve and condemned, in the same line. Would you want to serve somebody who sentenced you to death? No, but Kent will, because Kent believes that it is God-given duty to serve the king, and that's what he'll do. He is a fundamentally decent and honourable man. By Act 2, when he arrives at Gloucester's castle, and he gets into the altercation with Oswald, who he calls brilliantly a base football player, before beating him up. He is arrested by Cornwall and for his loutish behaviour, and he gives voice to the reason why he serves Lear in this brilliant speech. Call not your stocks for me, I serve the king. What's he saying? You can't punish me, I work for the king, on whose employment I was sent to you. You shall do small respect, show too bold malice against the grace and person of my master, stalking his messenger. And of course, the most important thing there is that phrase, grace. Because that tells you why Kent has this kind of almost, blind allegiance to Lear. Because he believes that Lear is God's anointed. He believes in the divine right of kings. The word grace is a reference to God's chosen. And what he's saying to Cornwall is, you can't put me in the stocks, because if you put me in the stocks, then that, as I represent the king, that's an insult to the king, and you can't insult the king because the king is God's anointed. And of course, we see that Kent's loyalty to Lear, does blind him to the truth that that's exactly what Cornwall wants. Cornwall wants, and Regan wants, to show Lear that they have no respect for him anymore, because they don't have to, because he gave his power away. We know what happens in that terrible scene where Lear is broken and humiliated by his daughters and goes out into the storm. He abjures all roofs. And by Act 3, we hear Kent telling us about, the sheets of fire and the bursts of horrid thunder. He says that he's never heard or seen a storm like this in his whole lifetime. But he says, "Fie on the storm, I will go seek the king." Again, the language is simple and monosyllabic and direct and sums up the man who speaks the words. He doesn't care about personal danger. He is utterly selfless. He will not pay any heed to any particular danger he might put himself in. He has a duty to the king. And then, you see him being so gentle with Lear. "Gracious, my lord," there's that word grace again. "Hard by here is a hovel. Some friendship will it lend you against the tempest." And of course, that's a wonderful example of metaphor by Shakespeare. Because here's Kent in a literal way bringing Lear into this hovel to try and protect him. But of course, that friendship that Kent gives Lear is what helps Lear survive the tempest in his mind. It's those people like Kent, like the Fool, like Gloucester, who remain loyal to Lear. They're the ones who offer him shelter in the storm, to quote Bob Dylan. But what does Kent's service do for him? Nothing really. And by the end of the play, he becomes a symbol of how cruel and unfair life is. And by the end of the play, we hear from Edgar that Kent has been broken by his experiences. He's done everything he can to serve the king, and then Cordelia and Lear lost the battle. And it was too much for Kent. And he's described as his grief grew puissant, and that means powerful. And the strings of life began to crack. He's literally cracking up. Figuratively cracking up. So Kent is a deeply tragic figure. He's a fundamentally good man, and yet there's no happy ending for him. If you were looking at general vision and viewpoint in terms of this play, you'd be looking at Kent. You'd be looking at what happens to him at the end. And he's described in such, admiring terms by Edgar as such a hero, when Edgar says that this was Kent, sir, the banished Kent, who in disguise followed his enemy king and did him service improper for a slave. I mean, this is why I love Shakespeare. Just look at that, the enemy king, the king that he served, even though the king condemned him. Kent served him, gave him service that was more selfless than a slave service. A slave is completely, controlled by, and his whole life revolves around service for his master, and that's what Kent was like. At the end of the play, when he's offered power, he refuses it after the defeat of the corrupt characters, but he refuses power, and he says, "Look, I don't want to live anymore. I have a journey so shortly to go. My master calls me. I must not say no." Is he going to commit suicide? Well, we don't know, but it's certainly Lear is dead, and he says he's going to go to Lear. So that ending, the way Kent's story ends, and those last lines by Kent and his typically modest refusal of a crown or of power, of a share of power, just captures the great sense of melancholy and darkness and sadness and the bleak reality of life at the end of the play. So he does play a very important role in capturing that. So there you go. There's Kent in 10 quotes. Hope that makes sense.